studio too?
Yep, everything.
And it's 148th
Division, like between Division and Pal. So.
All right, hello and welcome to tonight's meeting of the Hand-Eye Supply Curiosity Club. We're your hosts this evening. I'm Tobias, and this is Will. Together we have a number of curious and exciting topics to share with you.
As attendees of the Hand-Eye Supply Curiosity Club, you are all now members, provided you adhere to our philosophy. Ex curiositas scientia. We pledge to learn without prejudice in pursuit of our mutual goal, perpetual noviceship. We admit that it is impossible to know everything about anything, and thus we remain perpetually curious and perpetually novice.
This is our flag and our mascot, Franklin. Hungry for more. And now let's give a warm Curiosity Club welcome to Nial.
Let's hope this whole thing works. Okay, so I'm Nial from Hovercraft. We work way out in deepest, darkest southeast. Let's see. So I brought some props, I brought some cool stuff, and some other stuff to talk about. So let's go ahead and get started. Talk about. I basically got started being a musician plus years ago. Got into it in high school. Really loved music. Really loved sound. The first real moment for me was when I heard an AC/DC record and I heard loud, distorted guitar, and I thought, what the hell is that? I want some of that. How do they get that? And at the time where I was growing up, either in Canada, Yakima, Washington, most people played country, had no idea what rock and roll was all about. Distortion was kind of an aberration. My parents absolutely detested rock and roll, so for me it was kind of a one-man journey figuring out how do I get that sound. This is a little bit about the arc of that, as well as everything else. This being Portland, everybody's really into recycling, reclaiming. I'm kind of a scrounger. I'm kind of a deal hunter always, so that all. Hopefully this will help glue it together for you. Things like this all the time. Back when I listened to records and used to collect music like a crazy person, but I repeat myself. Vinyl records I would frequently find from the pressing plant, people had written in, like, I guess a diamond needle or something, some sort of weird little message like don't eat this or whatever. So I loved finding these little sort of treasure things, little messages from either the past or from somewhere else. I have no hope of ever knowing who this was that wrote it, that drew this, what the hell the deal was, but it was just a really amazing little surprise to like find things like this. So I'm, this is kind of the gold, pot of gold at the end of the rainbow sometimes for me. My personality is definitely one of a grazer as far as being kind of omnivorous as far as technology is concerned, new things, cultural, whatever. I'm architecture, furniture, clothing, music, motorcycles, guitars. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff, but I'm definitely an omnivore, and I'm constantly trolling around either on the internet or meeting new people, finding out new things about everything. So kind of keeping an open mind with what I do definitely helps kind of move forward separate parts. That one episode, that's a great idea. I'm like that. So keeping an open mind in this gig, if you can call it that. So here's an example. This was my grandmother's Queen Anne chair. And growing on it and sank to high heaven. When I got it, it looked like dogs had eaten it. And I thought, I goofed around on Etsy and Pinterest and got some ideas for some things, a little bit of influence of Chinese lacquer, whatnot. That drove the color. I found this pattern here on sale. I think it was in a bin, something like 50 cents a pound. Put those two things together, and I had a reimagined classic piece that was turned into something else that was quite beautiful, and it was in nice shape, nice to look at, and it was very piece. So this is kind of a little bit how my brain works as far as making something that's kind of had it. When I was in school, one of the first things I got into was computers and technology and games and breaking them and how did they work. I don't know if you guys saw 80 about. My friends that I went to high school were actually the reason the very first computer security laws were written for intrusion and break-ins. Writing the sign things over I-5 saying construction ahead 40 miles an hour or whatever, the evening that Iron Maiden played, all of the freeway signs on I-5 to say Iron Maiden. So those are the kind of I ended up working for was this fellow here. I was employee number 5 at MySpace. I was the first tester, software tester, and my job was to break shit. So all those times when you saw MySpace go down and not work and being offline, well, that was probably partially my fault. Kept being a series of Band-Aids and rubber bands and whatnot, but Tom sat on the other side of the cubicle from me, and so I got to see a very properly funded startup company, from a couple of guys working on sawhorses to, oh shit, we're part of like a major entertainment corporation, and this space happened within about 6 months. So that was kind of cool boot camp, I guess, for figuring out how to do stuff, how not to do stuff, mistakes not to make, not grow too quickly, things like that. I worked for Richard Branson. I worked on his iTunes killer application software, which worked with it was one of the very first pieces of players and cell phones. That was a big deal to have music on your cell phone. This is before the iPhone. This is back when phones had like a single little display of just some text on there, and the fact that you could actually get music on your phone was a big deal. One of the really things was the Virgin Galactic team, which was like 2 guys, was sitting right next to me. And so I got to hear people talking about space entry and reorbit and composite materials and all this. These guys are flying spaceships up into space, and people may not. So the environment was pretty amazing. He's a very, very dynamic, energetic person, very inspirational. I had a very good experience working for him, but later, a lot of people had such a time, so I don't know. I'm fortunate to have gained a lot of really positive experiences with that guy, but again, also workflow, creativity, being able to use and just run with them, just for the hell of it. And that gave me a lot of confidence, because this boss was very, I need 5 different teams working on the same thing and they all better work, and God forbid it breaks. And everything was very cautious and very fear-driven. This guy was very, try it, whatever, it's not the end of the world, you know, if your demo blows, you're talking to people or presenting to the press, not a big deal. So it definitely gave me the confidence to move forward. And one of the other guys that I neglected to mention, actually, let's see, I probably worked for him right after Bill Gates. That's Thomas Dolby. She Blinded Me with Science, if anybody remembers that. He worked on very, very early music authoring software. So I got exposure to a lot of very cool tools about sound and what changes sound, audio algorithms, what makes good sound, what makes bad sound. Why is this good? Why is that bad? And not just qualitatively, but just taking a microphone with a computer, recording it, and then looking at the waveform and showing this is why this is bad, this is why this is good. And he is a very natural engineer, but he's also a very creative person. And once again, being around an influence, it's the standard freeway you can sometimes take. As an example of some of my bizarre ass cooking, which I'm somewhat famous for. This is a banana wrapped around in, let me see, some sort of cornflakes with chopped up bacon, kiwi fruit, something else and something else in a style roll. And I wanted a bit of fruit, I wanted a bit of savory. Worked. Would I eat it again? Probably not, but was it worth the experiment? Yes. So people kind of term me a bit of a gastronaut. Really weird food together. So if you ever look on my Facebook and see some crazy ass crap like coconut M&Ms with sriracha and something else, that's pretty normal for me. So something else I got into, lived in LA for a while, was, as you do, is TV, film, and video and advertising production. That was kind of what you do, and I noticed there were a lot of musicians also doing that sort of stuff. So I worked on a couple of films, most of them piles of crap, but the most famous one had Betty White in it. But I did set dressing, art department. All these books here were originally brand new, so I learned very quickly how to knock things down, how to age them, how to distress them, how to turn them into something else. This helped me learn the difference between looks good in person and looks good on camera, and sometimes those are not the same thing. Makeup there, those guys look like zombies. Really realistic, and they had depth, and the visual composition made complete sense. So there's kind of an art to it, and there's a bit of science to it, because you're working with differing materials, caustic chemicals sometimes, things that do and don't work. And again, you're kind of concocting recipes, and ultimately you've got to make the stuff look good for film. Another example, this is a motorcycle that I customized. I also do motorcycles. This was a raw steel tank, and I ended up with a fender that looked like James Edward Olmos's face, basically. It was completely coated in rust. It basically had holes through it, and it was totally unusable as a fender. So I scenicked it, I ran silver metallic paint, I aged it, I buffed it, I actually painted in the various welding and formation seams by hand, and actually got it to blend. So everything else on it was raw steel except for the rear fender, and that is towards the end of the process. You can still, there's still a bit of like a brown tonality and a gray tonality, but I was actually able to get, and most people can't tell unless they're this close. So that's kind of one of the other talents I kind of grabbed. This is a photo session set that I dressed just recently for a baby clothing photo session, just because I felt like it, and it's got some of my junk in there, and that was kind of fun. But again, dressing things for lighting and visual impact is something that's part of my background. So I was a musician for, oh my lord, probably 20 years. I played in bands in the United States and the UK. This is probably potentially the most famous band I played with. That's me stuffed back there with the beard. This is one of the fellows from Mcgaughey, one of the fellows from a band called Electric Wizard, and the whole band was produced by the band Head, so we got kind of taken under our wing, and this was the whole shtick with the bus and the tour venues and all this other stuff. And that was about the people plugging and unplugging their guitar and running the cables around, which horrifies me to no end, just twisting them around their thing and throwing it in the cable bag, and that's the end result. It breaks. And somebody goes, why are my cables broken? Well, A, treated it like an ape, and B, it was a cheap ass cable to begin with. This was another conversation, like people will drop thousands of dollars on a really expensive guitar, really expensive amplifier, and then they would cheap out on their cables and just get like $5 whatever bucket cables by the door at their local music store. And I would think all of your sound from your expensive guitar is going through this $5 cable into this really beautiful amplifier. It'd be like driving buying a Ferrari and putting like tires on. Why doesn't it corner? Why don't the brakes work? Well, it's all dependent on this specific thing. So that was hard lesson number one. That led me to start a guitar cable company, which was the best cable in the world. And it was taking care of all those problems I just described, the mechanical wear and tear and the sound problem. And that company is still going. That's my first company that I started. We're still the only company in the world that makes a very high-end, high-quality sound guitar cable, but it's basically indestructible. This company is currently distributed by Dean Markley. This company's been in business about 14 years. I learned a lot of things. One of the very first ones, which I already iterated, was better parts, better sound. This is the wiring that's inside a mass market guitar amplifier that's considered one of the best in the world. Its name is Marshall, and they are sold all over the world, and they're considered the industry standard. They're considered the Honda Accord, the McDonald's hamburger of I want a rock and roll guitar sound, and that's what's wired in there. And that wire is so small, you can see how many of my individual fingerprints are in there. That's 2 ridges wide of wire. There's 100 watts at 5 amps, which is a lot, can kill you. Running through that wire, that's all your sound. So needless to say, one of the first things I do is upgrade it with bigger wire. And hey, what do you know? It sounds amazing. I ran the numbers. Marshall's saving approximately $5 per, which makes no bloody sense until you realize Marshall cranks out probably 50,000 guitar cabinets every 6 months. That's a pretty significant cost savings. This is one of the things I learned brewing beer, cooking, things like that. I can splurge out an extra $5 and get like Portland ketchup instead of Heinz. Amazing, but if I was a restaurant manufacturer like Racer's Foods or something, I would go broke putting that extra money into my product, because what I saw out there was you can have any amp you want, generally speaking, as long as it's black. And it's these very specific circuits and these very specific sounds. Sounds an awful lot like the very first motor car production. I thought, huh, that's interesting. And this is in an era of extreme customization. Nike shoes any way you want it. You can get Vans, whatever you like. You can have custom t-shirts for anybody. You can custom order your car, guitar, pedals, everything else in the chain except the amplifier. Amplifier is expected to just kind of lump it. Like, I need an amp, okay, well, I go to my local mega store and that's what I get. So, these were some aha moments for me. And I was like, oh shit, huh, that's interesting. Very first one I saw was an Japanese artist, took a bunch of these amps and painted them pink. Marshall hated it. Marshall wanted them to stop. Marshall does not like even the sense of that photo because it portrays their amps in a whatever light, and it's not official company line or whatever. So, and this offends a lot of people's sensibilities for whatever reason. So that was my first, you can push the standards and do something really cool. And then I started seeing, as you did back in the day, mashups, taking something evil and turning it into something sort of cute. And this gal here, this is a color photo, completely color. I don't know if anybody's already seen this, but she dressed and did makeup and everything to desaturate herself so that she looked like a black and white photo in real life. And I thought, wow, that could be a whole bunch of amplifiers or whatever, but she certainly stands out. Thematically, she's still there, but design-wise, she's very. The other thing I saw was this fellow here. I believe it's Toy Robot. They did these vinyl rabbit paint their own kits. And this is something that a theme that you'll see following further and further along in this discussion. The sheer versatility, the sheer imagination I saw expressed on these particular toys was nothing short of mind-blowing. I thought, oh my God, this format is so tired. It's a toy, it's a rabbit. I kept seeing design after design after design after design that was like, oh my God, like this isn't even a rabbit. What the hell is this thing? Darth Vader, you can think of any sort of theme and it's like, this is like a blank slate or just a piece of bread. You can build any sort of customization. An ability to make the name out there. So these are other people's themes that everybody else picked. This was an instantaneous feedback loop, but it was really cool, some of the stuff people came up with. Some of the stuff was really terrible, and I had a very hard time working through these ideas and turning them into something I could actually feel good about sticking my name onto. But this Kickstarter posted 600% over its original, whatever the hell, financial goal themes I got were Blade Runner, Star Wars, oh shoot, I can't remember, 1930s Art Deco film noir, but with a space theme, Back to the Future, and some nebulous space monster thematic weird Italian comic book. Right away that we can do this, we can make cool custom stuff, make decent money, and have people that are like over the effing moon. I got this. This is the only one like this. This is the only one like this. So that was a great lesson in economics, creativity, and production for me, big time. So where I get my spark from, my idea to make some of this crazy stuff, if I don't have an external customer, well, obviously one of them is having an external customer that has a story, wants to fill something in, has something missing. I get people who call me and say my amp got stolen, my whatever, I've got a gig coming up, I need something specific. I'm like, aha, that's a problem. I can come up with a solution. Some of this is my crazy ass ideas. I get inspired by films and comic books and cars and construction and in Portland and any old wacky thing, people. So I figure out themes, I look at history, what's applicable. I consult what I call the library if I'm building up an idea. These are some of my guitars, and there are graded and selected kind of according to what they do, and it's kind of like one does ketchup, one does mustard, one does vinegar, one does salt, one does pepper. That's kind of how I pick this out. They're very genericized. These 8 guitars represent about 95% of most guitars out there stylistically. I have a very broad set of brushes or good crayons with. Here's a couple of examples of external customers, 3 examples. One is I had a fellow who, I think I'd say he's probably in his early, late 50s. Nial, John, loved the Blues Breakers and loved Eric Clapton, and he was after this performance, this specific amp from that musician. And he had live tapes to play me, and I had to listen. And I had to figure out what era this was. I had to do some historical search on the company, Marshall, and look up what this was, this tiny little nubbin of nameplate, and figure out what year this was, what the wattage was, what was in it, and then go figure out the circuit for it. So I reverse engineered it off a picture, a description, and sounds, and I did it. I nailed it. One of my first major detective treasure hunt type situations. And I knew I nailed it when the guy wrote me back and he said, I have that guitar era model he's playing, which is, I believe, 1950s, what's called a Les Paul back. The story was in the 70s, he was very broke. He was about to be kicked out. Upon his amp, he lost it. He never got it back, and he's been ever since. I got to give him his amp back, and that really made my day. This is another amp here. This is Brian Nutter. He is the guitar for Keith Urban. Like the guy's playing, he sounds amazing. He has a vintage Marshall that he has played to death. It is literally falling apart. Chunks falling out of it. It is this close to dying. It is his sound, and he can't tour or play without his specific thing. A similarity I've read is people that are graphics artists that get used to a certain specific pen or a paintbrush, and then the company goes, stop making it, and then they have to go around and buy up all of them because they're screwed. So I understood that, so I researched. He gave me the serial number of his amplifier. I ran the details. I looked up all I could, including build records for Marshall for that year. I found the actual parts that were built in the amplifier to that era. He built that amplifier in that amplifier, which this is at the Seattle Center where he received the amplifier and basically lost it because that was it. So.
With the old capacitors, if they're not, because I know after time in use they wear out. Is that true if they're not?
So that's an excellent side note. So there are capacitors, there's a bunch of different types. Thank you for that question. That's actually a very good one. There are various types, and I'll hand these little doodads out. There are what are called paper and oil, which there are two plates and they have a little bit of oil between them, and that is the electrical resistance that shapes tone at a very simple level. These are made in Russia. These were very old world methods. It was cheaper because they had the resources, because. So there's this very interesting sort of east-west disconnect between components on, and how some countries are decades behind us, but in fact actually the parts that they're making are actually the good old way. It's like being able to go to a Ford dealership and say, you know what, I want a brand new 65 Mustang fastback paint. You can still buy one, but it's in Russia. These are original maps from the 1950s and 1960s. They're in a lot of very, very coveted amplifiers. These, because of the materials inside them, these are unused, or what's called NOS, not optioned stock. These are, not all of them survived. So you have some that, even though they're brand new, the little legs are still there, they've never been put into anything. Some of them you put voltage through them and they just blow right through, and others hold, and that's just a age. It's maybe a little bit like aging wine or whiskey. Sometimes you get vinegar, sometimes you get the most amazing experience ever. So these ones, you have to go through them and pick through them and go, oh, bad, 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 oh, got a good one, and you have to kind of hand sift through them. These are made in Great Britain in the 70s. These are used. I frequently have customers that say, just make me something that sounds like this. I really enjoy those very much. And they say, just make the amp blue and have a lot of distortion. And I always go back with, what music do you play? Do you have any recordings? Do you have any favorite guitar players? It's really exciting because that's a blank. A few design limitations. It's really fun because that's like a whole new playground to go through. A lot of times what I build is what's available, what's on offer. This is an amplifier that went through a fire at a music store that we'll be able to gut this and use some of the metal components inside of it. Obviously speakers, trash, things like that. That stuff you can usually either get it for free or by the pound. These are pieces of, for whatever reason, very, very expensive, what's called Baltic birch plywood, void free, and it was used for pallets, and they were by Widmer Brewing, and I rolled up with my van and grabbed as many of them as I can because those are sheets of plywood. Number one, the Russian forests that this stuff grows in are getting harder and harder to get the wood out of because of global warming, because the roads that a lot of these tractors that tow these logs to the sawmill, they're not staying frozen as long, and so there are like bulldozers sunk completely in mud that we're trying to pull these things out. So this stuff, a sheet of it would be over $100, and I got sheets and sheets and sheets of it. Some of it had nails in it, some of it has holes in it, but this is pretty cool. So I'm able to make a lot of stuff out of junk. These are obviously pallets. These also make very good components for things like speaker cabinets, heads. These are some of them that are in process. That one used to be this chunk of pallet here, and with a little bit of woodworking and some Tolexing. Tolexing is this sort of vinyl covering. You can hide a multitude of sins and it will still be very, very strong. And I mean, it's the head part. It's not generating sound except electricity. Speaker cabinets are a slightly different situation. So, and frequently, like I talked about the capacitors, you'll have an opportunity for capacitors that are super rare, super impossible to find. And that means like, and make massive cost savings, and that's another way I can keep the prices on what I do. Is what goes into it. I got it for almost nothing, and that also drives the design of what I'm able to offer as amplifiers. Use only one value, one certain sound, or certain other parts, and that's what I'm going to make. You know, if eggs are on special, really well built key, and the engineering. That goes above and beyond just giving you a key. So that key, I have an old BMW motorcycle I'm trying somewhat successfully. every time I pick up the case, you know, this is going to be really cool. This is going to be really fun. This thing was really, so I owe it to this machine to do justice to it. So some other experiences about this generating a positive experience from the get-go with what I do is, this is Mesa Boogie Dual Rectifier. They were what would be called a one-trick pony. One sound, it does it very well, but that's what it does. They've kind of come and gone, fallen out of favor, but I owned one. I owned a very early serial number, and the components that they used right out of the gate were very, very good, because Mesa was trying to make a name for these amplifiers, and they had the parts available. My first experience, every time I used that amplifier, was flicking on this what's called a toggle switch here. And most guitar amplifiers these days are made with a little plastic rocker switch. You push it and it kind of goes clunk, makes a weird sticky sound. The light switches in these walls actually make a nicer sound, a more substantial on-off experience than most guitar amplifiers. Those things, they're heavy. It takes significant effort to turn it on. When it flips it on, the whole amp goes thunk. You know this is going to be a pretty cool amp, just from that one thunk. So music, to me, is about inspiring you to have a positive experience. It's about you creating art. And I view music and musical instruments as part of an own quantity, that when you play music, you learn new musical parts. You're wiring your brain. I like to be able to be a part of that process. And this quote from Brian Eno really, really rammed it home. It was something, again, that was floating around. I saw this, and it was like a lightning rod for my thoughts. Stop thinking about artworks as objects and start thinking about them as trigger for experiences. Well, that's the start of an amazing experience. That key means you're going to have a really good experience. I have other motorcycles, and they don't feel like that. And that's has some history. He said, sure. So I lit it on fire. I found aged original military spec components. That is some sort of radio indicator light out of a battleship. I found a toggle switch, which is frequently on weapons systems. He was into this military theme. So I kept building and building and building on it until the thing looked like a complete relic. From this one specifically was era of around World War I, except for obviously the ticker tape and whatnot. And I found original knobs dating back to that era, original components, and then I got into the head of who would be somebody that would be using this in World War I. What are some sorts of things? Well, I discovered that tanks, British tanks, one had a hot water heater built into the radiator of the engine so that the tank crews, while they were rolling around up, could still have hot tea. It needs a tea timer. This is the result of lighting the amp on fire, and then I ended up layering and layering and layering, again, building up depth, building up visual experience. There's some tactile experience there, but I have to light something on fire. So tubes and parts, these are the internal components of what make a tube amp what it is. I briefly on even order harmonics, which are pleasing to the human ear. There's essentially there's tubes, and there's what's called solid state. Solid state, again, is like an open door. It lets everything through sound-wise. Add some of it good. Tubes actually act like a natural filter that kind of notch out stuff psychoacoustically our ears don't like to hear. So they have a bit of a feel or sponginess to them that is maybe like the difference with a hard metal scribe on something, and there's no flex or give in the stroke, versus a paintbrush where you kind of have to work it and move it and watch where it's going. That's sort of an analogy to it. It's kind of bad, but it's close to what I got. But anyhow, these are the orange capacitors I talked about. This is one of those vintage paper capacitors. In there, I learned that there are parts of amplifiers that really matter what the parts are, and there are other parts that it's just almost the electronics equivalent of housekeeping. Be a toilet. But the color of the or the carpet or the quality of the appliances or whatever affect what's going on. The analogy isn't really good, but stick with me. These parts in here are what are called metal film resistors. They're very, very durable. So I'm able to take some of the combinations of very high quality parts and mix them in with the really expensive ketchup and get something that's 95% of the way there to the original examples that I'm design-wise. I don't absolutely copy any amplifier. I definitely do not copy any amplifier on any living designer that's still producing amplifiers. I think that's very, very wrong. I've had people request, hey, will you make me this one guy's amp specifically? There's a guy named Alexander Dumble. His amplifiers start at $20,000. The used ones that are available are $50,000. He wanted me to make him a Dumble and put Dumble on it. I absolutely refused. Props, I have 20-something watts, and they can scale all the way up to several hundred watts. There are still radio transmission towers. I'm not sure if they're in very old radio transmission towers for FM, AM, use transmitter tubes, and some of them can be as tall as a man and several thousand watts, and like, you right procedure to change it out. But they all down to preamp tubes, which put out a fraction of a watt, and also kind of get you get a lot of the from the preamp tubes. You'll see a lot of iPod little box with tubes is again taking something that's digital and running it through a little bit of analog to get again the even order harmonics, which again are pleasing to the ear. People say that warms up the sound. So that's tubes. Also these tubes, the very first computers were running vacuum tubes, and this was considered a U.S. security thing to still have a viable vacuum tube production up until the 1980s. And then sometime during the 1980s, the military decided that vacuum tubes were obsolete. We're all going to use solid state. There was one small problem. With the nuclear Cold War, there was what we called a magnetic pulse event from a nuclear weapon explosion that went through all solid state devices. So in other words, if we had a nuclear bomb go off, I don't know, miles away, all of our computers, all of our phones would stop working permanently. The Soviets, the Eastern Bloc countries, knew this magnetic pulse liability with stuff, and they continued to make tubes. And so a lot of the tubes we get today around here, these were originally servo or gyromotor tubes, fighter jets and tanks. And so these are actually still being made in the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union basically never stopped making them. So it's lucky, guitar players and bass players are very lucky that to adapt and move forward quickly with technology, otherwise we wouldn't have these. Basically, there's only 3 factories in the world still making tubes. One is in China, one is in Russia. There have been numerous attempts for US manufacturers to restart tube production. Overhead costs are so high that they can't do it properly. These tubes cost roughly 20 bucks a piece. The ones that the US factories were attempting to produce are $300, and they have a massive failure rate. The weird thing is, the US Brits more or less had the largest hand in designing vacuum tubes, but like the the Mayan pyramids, we don't know how the fuck we made them. Most of the manuals, most of all the chemistry cookbooks and everything, they all got chucked in the trash. So our own US engineers are trying to dig up people that still know how to cook up the and components to make this stuff, because all the manuals, all the trial knowledge is lost permanently. So that's that. Less than a 4% rejection rate. Chinese manufactured tubes currently have roughly an 8% rejection rate. That means you get 10 will be possibly usable. Big. One of the things, there's one of them, and it's Jimmy Page's, and it's worth $100,000, and Jimmy Page isn't going to give it up for some dork like me to rip apart and learn how it works. The vintage examples are either unavailable or they're so expensive I couldn't afford them. either find schematics or reverse engineer things or read up enough that I could actually build a working copy, working version in my own workshop and listen to it and experience it in person. And again, like the idea of setting a set for film versus in real life, what you hear recorded is not necessarily the same thing that's actually going on in the room. Usually there's a highly, if you're working in Photoshop, blowing up this contrast and saturation in the studio, because there's a lot of studio gear between the amp, the speaker, the microphone, and your in things, causing that sound to make it than it is. So that was a very interesting experience for me, walking through all these other design paths, and I could kind of, in a way, see how minds worked when they were laying things out and why they did something there. I'm still nowhere near this guy. I'm certainly not an expert, but it definitely gave me a damn good foundation. Another analogy was, in French cooking, one of the first things you're supposed to learn, at least from the book that I read, is learn how to make an omelet. And you're supposed to make hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of omelets until you can make a perfect omelet. Still can't make a perfect omelet. Another thing I discovered in my search was that signal-wise, for either safety reasons or warranty claim reasons, a lot of tube amp designers were running their components way below their capacity. And this is something I discovered with wire as well. There's a whole bunch of unused sound and fidelity and response and all these other wonderful things that are going unused in amplifiers, mainly because large companies, Fender and Ampeg are a specific example, hated warranty claims. Did not want to ship out an amp and have it either break or burn up, or have the end user running it during the warranty period and have something burn up or blow up running closer to the actual limit. It's like saying a factory designed car is not designed for what ends up becoming like drift cars. They burn up motors, burn up transmissions. It's you know, once you void your warranty, you're kind of on your own. So I took great interest in voiding warranties design-wise, and I discovered that there was a whole bunch of unused potential in just about every amp I looked at. And so discovering that limit, that wall, and then pushing it, how far can I run these things before they catch fire, they burn up, or they break? I'm still learning. That's part of my workshop. This is part of my design process. I will tear things apart. I will have things in completely catastrophic array, but I somehow know where everything is. It's almost like archaeology, where there's certain layers. Like I was working on this piece recently. Oh, that was from 6 months ago. That was from 3 years ago. So if I need to find parts, that's where it is. Tearing it apart sort of helps me at least spatially see an arrangement, how an amp works. Things from left to right very linearly. I don't multitask very well. I have to see things laid out very cleanly. I use bigger and bigger and bigger sheets of paper. So having my whole entire shop as a sandbox or a design drafting table is very helpful to me. Or people should have large ones or whatever. So this is what keeps me going every single day. And the French term it the thrill, the chill up the back of the neck when you recall something amazing, you hear beautiful music, you're at a play, you're at a movie, you get that chill, that tingle. Other people describe it as that holy shit moment. There is an actual, I forget what the acronym means, but it's AMSR, and it is an actual flood of dopamine and pleasure center you experience. And that is the bow of the ship that drives me in any direction on what I do design-wise. And I feel like when my guys get, and I get that email back, I failed, because I need to blow people away. I know what I hear in my shop is amazing, and if I don't get that, I feel like that is my primary motivator. Design work and the sound in research and everything else. If it doesn't have that, I don't do it. Another analog would possibly be the founder of CD Baby said, fuck yeah or no. In making decisions, he got invited all the time to conferences and speaking engagements and dinner engagements, and he would always say yes. And he realized he had no damn time because he was doing all these things that he sort of wanted to or was kind of interested in. And as soon as he shut that gate off and just said, it's fuck yes or no, that freed up a ton of his time. And that's the same thing with the design stuff. I could make middling design stuff, but if I stop at pretty good, it's okay, spending that extra 15 minutes to get that holy shit, it could be just this far away. Another important lesson I learned is when to put the brush down. This is a painting I did, I don't know how many years ago, probably 15 years ago. And I was this close to getting it done. And I ran out of give a shit. And I said, that's enough. And it's a roasted turkey on a Rococo style, swirly, vaguely Liberace-esque background. But I stopped. And I'm okay with it. So, some case studies of some amps I did, just to bring you the sexy. This was some scraps out of a carpenter shop that we rescued from the dumpster. This is a hand silk screen front end, what's called a baffle or faceplate. An artist friend of mine did that. It turns out that the amplifier that we're building is actually her ex-boyfriend's, but he was okay with that. For a fellow named Mcgaughey, he plays in a band called Yob. All of these components that you see in here, again, battleship components, mil-spec, old parts that we used to build and build and build and build. I found some very rare, weird tubes that did a very, very specific thing, and because they were mil-spec, they were probably underrated for what they were actually able to do. And because I discovered on my own that they work in tube amps very, very well, I was able to tame an amplifier that I was having a lot of design problems with. Point being is this was a very interesting exercise, and it's artistically, I think, very, very interesting, and it combines several things that I really enjoy. Painting outside the lines, doing something artistically really decent integrity, and using very high quality components to kind of complete the mix. This amplifier is one of the loudest, highest wattage guitar amplifiers I've ever made. I organically started to attract people who wanted to help me, which I'm really grateful for because everybody's very, very talented in multiple areas. I couldn't do this without with people that were good at one thing and just wanted to push a button and come to work. Everybody that works with me, they're all musicians, every one of them. Several of them work in film as hobbyists or recording engineers, or they're all multidisciplinarians, which I think makes this stuff have even more depth than it normally would. This is an original Sun amplifier cabinet I rescued from a trash pile outside an apartment building. Sun built amps here in Portland up until, I'm going to say, the late 70s. They were used by Jimi Hendrix and The Who and everybody else. This was another thing I found that was almost garbage, and I resurrected it, put it in a modern speaker driver, and gave it away at a local music competition. This is an amplifier that the t-shirt was something my ex-girlfriend gave me. I tore it apart, I repurposed it as an amplifier, and then put in my own little weirdo messages and things like this. This is some old fabric I used to have when I used to live in Los Angeles for a little while. And I used to go down to an area called the Fabric District, and they used to have just bins and bins of crazy fabric, and that was one that's been following me around for 15 years, and I figured out that red would be kind of good, and that compositionally worked. So back when you saw the Darth Vader Hello Kitty, that has followed me. I decided to do a Hello Kitty themed amplifier. The interesting contradiction, juxtaposition is that is the angriest, most aggressive sounding amplifier I've ever made. And it is completely cute. It is totally cute. It has all smiley faces. The little kitties line up when all the volume knobs are all the way up. The kitty's eyes light up. It is pink and perfect and beautiful, and there's not a shred of irony or any of that in there. These are a couple of other amplifiers I made. Let me see if I brought any of the other ones with me. Nope. This is the book, what's called the book amplifier. It is actually an homage to the movie Fahrenheit 451. This is an art series amplifier. I did bring the 451 here with me so you can check it out. Actually, I will lay it up on the counter here. The one on the lower right is one that was painted by one of the gals that works for me. I'm actually really happy with that because I'm actually able to give back. She works for me part-time, doesn't make a lot of money, and I was able to sell that amplifier for a little bit more money than a normal one, and for the artwork that she contributed. This here used to be a science fiction painting that I got as a housewarming gift, and I cut it apart because I couldn't stand it anymore, and then I realized This will work as a guitar amplifier. That one's sold. This is another one of those shots of the burnt up amplifier. This amplifier here is running Dungeons and Dragons 20-sided game dice for knobs. This went to a guy locally in Portland that's really, really, really into metal. And I thought this will be a really, really, really amplifier. This one went to Switzerland. It glows in the dark. He really liked Dr. Seuss. And I kind of suspected he was a bit of a Euro raver, so I kind of threw in some glow in the dark, some other special effects. These were old theater curtains from Los Angeles that I scavenged and turned into an amplifier. Japanese art print fabric that when you get up very, very closely, it makes your eyes swim. You cannot focus on there. I found an early Japanese pharmaceutical ad for a medicine called Serenade. Thank you. So in the back of most amplifiers, there is a bit of ventilation back here for the tubes to release heat so they don't kind of go into thermal overload and blow up and bad things happen. Mike Scheit's amp, that one up there with the gigantic knob. Some amps have got metal bars across them. Mike kind of reminds me of like a druid or a wizard. He's got a gigantic beard. He's got this sort of earthly, rooted quality to him, and he's I don't know. He's a very interesting fellow. And that head shell was actually a park bench that we chopped it out of, and so it was a very custom size. We didn't have anything off the shelf that we could just put on there to protect the tubes for it. I had just chopped down a maple tree, and I found some branches. The branches were next to the head shell, and I thought, we're going to cut the branches and use them for bar guards to protect it. So in the back, when you put the amplifier around, there's actual maple limbs with the little, attached to it. So kind of detail thing. I love details because they bring people delight when they discover them, and I try not to tell people. I want them always to be a let's see, more of that. So that's what the painting amp originally looked like. It was gigantic, and it was ugly, and it was from the 70s, and it had to go, and I couldn't sell it on Craigslist for love or money. So I had to do something with it. This is a very close stylistic copy of an original Sun T amplifier, but I did a let's see. Cosmetics-wise, it's simple. It uses the same design language that they originally of it use. This is a lesson I learned at Microsoft about extend and embrace. Most of the time, buy one of those amplifiers, hear a specific sound that has studio processing or pedals or effects on it. This one, I took those effects and what people wanted to actually hear and built it into the amplifier, so you didn't have to do that. So it was the original circuit, but it's like a T-bucket Ford that suddenly has a motor with a blower and all this other crazy stuff on there. I like pushing designs way beyond where they were originally meant to go because interesting happens. This is in my furniture fetish. I'm into Eames chairs. I like them, so I took some of the design language of a standard Eames chair, incorporated it into an amplifier, did another one that was another riff on it with zebrano wood and faux leather. These are guitar picks I make out of old milk jugs that you can actually cut up old credit cards or whatever. Sometimes I throw those in with the amplifiers. This is a particularly hideous tapestry I decided to do something silly with because I felt like it. And one of the gals that was working with me played in a band called Taurus, and one of the zodiacs that's on there is Taurus, and I had her do the faceplate for that specific one. So that's all I got. Enjoy the ride. Thank you very, very much. Questions? Anything? I've got some props here. This, again, getting into that mid-century modern thing. It's an excellent question. I grew up in Canada, and so my television experience was actually British television, and I dorked out to British science fiction. And so there's always going to be like a little bit of a British bent, and I remember seeing on in 2 years. So we've actually ended up becoming probably the biggest custom amplifier manufacturer probably in the northern hemisphere, I think. But don't quote me on that. This one is the Fahrenheit 451 amp, and I really love the Francois Truffaut film, and it really spoke to me. It and Apocalypse Now, for whatever reason, whatever that says about me, are two of my favorite films. And so I took a lot of the thematic stuff from Fahrenheit 451. Found some of the original book titles that were in the film that got burned, and incorporated little hidey-hole things, screen elements of the actual amplifier, knobs that date back to that era, and I have burned pieces of a 1920s copy of Lady Chatterley's Lover stuck all over it. So it's been lit on fire. The handle is famous Roman emperors, book side. This is kind of one of the things that kind of started me on this whole make standard, interesting, cool stuff that your average person will still really love, but then still don't be afraid to go out and do something completely idiotic. And I hate to even bring up Facebook, but I will post up pictures of regular amps and there'll be 100 likes, whatever. I posted up pictures of this thing and it was like beyond any posting I ever did. So I knew I struck a nerve doing weird crap like this. So, yes?
Are you to the point now where you just know how to make an amplifier that's got a specific sound?
Yes.
Or do you, because you've done enough of them, so you don't need a breadboard and
Nope.
mock them up and see
Nope.
what they do?
Example, Mike Scheitz amp. I had a 3-hour interview with him. I don't know how I had the time. He sat and played through everything I made at the time, and I took pages and pages and pages and pages of notes of what he did want, what he didn't want. And that started sculpting a recipe in my head. He needed this, but not that. He loved these kinds of amps, but didn't like what they did in this specific situation. And I was able to go through my notes and just about go, that's this, that's that, that's this, that's that, and then put together a prototype schematic. I drew it out by hand, I did the layout, I built it, and it was like, oh shit, it's there. It sounds good. And Mike loves the amp, which is kind of in a way the most awesome thing of all. But yeah, I am able to this point, at this point now, take verbiage and turn it into a circuit, I guess.
Is that a new thing, or is that like, I mean, you're just like, oh, finally I can kind of nail it first time, or like?
From creating something raw from scratch like that, his circuit was, it's never been done. It's never, not to coin a phrase or reuse a meme, but that specific circuit had never, ever, ever been done before. I took parts or sections stylistically of specific amps and recombined them in ways nobody had ever done before, and the result was what I was hoping for. Previously, if people were like, I need a this style of amp that does this specific thing, but I need it to not do this one or two things, that was very easy for me. But this is the very first one where it's like taking core building blocks and sticking them together and standing back going, okay, I hope it doesn't explode.
Yeah.
So, yes.
Sounds like probably a hurdle for anybody you want. Like,
Yeah.
over that hump is a lot of hours just
Big time.
fucking around.
But yeah, big time. And we had not a small amount of debugging, but all that said and done, I'm very, very pleased with it. And it was a massive confidence builder for me because it's there, it's out there in the wild. He's put already several bias.
Yeah, I had a question about that you sort of just addressed it in a way, but I remember hearing that some old amplifiers, the reason the power transformers were so heavy is they would coat them in cement so that people couldn't
Oh, wow.
actually see the way that they're like really Fender amps.
Yeah.
So they couldn't see the way that they were wound and how many winds they had. And all
That wouldn't surprise me. So the guy that I referenced earlier, Alexander Dumble, he uses what's called goop on all of his amps, and he basically takes the chassis, the metal part with all the electronic components, and just dumps a bucket of crap over it that if you try and find out what he did, you'll basically destroy the amp. He's legendary for that. That's the very extreme version. And I get both sides of the argument, like you want to protect your work, you want to hide it, you've worked on something for years and years and years or months or whatever, put a lot of heavy lifting in it, and then some guy just looks at it and then just copies it. Worst possible case scenario, and this keeps happening over and over and over again, is a guy will design something, an Asian manufacturer will get a hold of it and reproduce it and pop it out for $9. I'm not going to name names, but there are several companies that make stuff that you can go buy at Guitar Center and elsewhere that do exactly that, and they make a shitload of money off of it. At the NAMM show, which is kind of like the Super Bowl for music manufacturers, what is the guy's name? Zachary Vex, Z-Vex. He is renowned for having some really cool pedals that are designed, and he had a whole bunch of early prototypes and shit. Well, somebody, when the show was closed, went through and swiped every one of his pedals. And nobody knows who did it, and several pretty darn close things have popped up in the market since those things disappeared, and those were his only versions. So I hope he wrote circuits down, but there's a bit of skullduggery within the business that is out there, and it's kind of entertaining, but it's also kind of like, really? Can't come up with ideas? Okay. So anyhow, yes?
You're still making pedals?
Yes. Yes, I just have massive problems with supply, and I've only got enough people to do one or the other thing. But yes, I will be doing pedals again. I've got a fuzz wah design that's original that it's either going to be made by myself or it's going to be made by Dean Markley under license. So.
A lot of the amps that you showed us were custom, but I noticed some of the names, like there's Falcon and the Dwarf.
Mm-hmm. Yep, Dwarvenaut.
So are those kind of like a standard
pattern,
or?
Yeah, the Dwarvenauts and Falcons and all the other ones, it's more or less at a very high level, just refer to the wattage level. Okay. Like the Dwarvenauts are kind of our smallest wattage amps. Falcons are 50 to 100 watts. We make a bass amp called an Elder Giant, but we've made them for guitar and bass. Out there that need a 100 watt guitar amp for whatever reason. I'm definitely learning are fairly within guitar player, bass players' needs. There's like a spectrum that 95% of them need, and like a Leatherman or Swiss Army knife, like if you can do all of those specific sounds and really well, you've encompassed all these people's needs and then some, and that's something I'm finding out with do this style sound, that style sound, that style sound, and really good. And again, one of the things I try and design out is that one trick thing where it's like, well, it does this one thing, that's all it does. So about that, I'm like, God, what are you thinking? The only thing that I kind of go, boy, I wish he did a bit better was honestly the major manufacturers. And I get it, it's cost. You know, they need an amp on the floor at Guitar Center for 99 bucks, and that's what you get. But generally, custom builders, I've generally seen a pretty damn good consistent code of honor. Like, you get what you pay for. You got good parts. It's well designed. The person who made it is a nice, decent, honorable person. And people don't get into designing guitar amps because they want to get rich. If you want to get rich, go become a doctor, a lawyer, a .com, venture capitalist, I don't know what. But in music, you're not going to get rich. So people generally in this thing are in it for passion. So I would hope. Anyone else? Yes.
Just a quick couple of approaches with nothing sort of things. I've followed that for a while now, and it's been pretty enjoyable and funny.
Yep.
Watching your food choices.
Yes.
Second of all, we were on the coast this past weekend, and we were sitting at a restaurant in Guitars Bay, Oceanside.
Mm-hmm.
And this scruffy old biker guy with these old leathers rolls up on I believe it was a 54 Vincent Black Shadow.
Oh my God. Wow.
Yeah, just like immaculate. And
Yep.
we got to talk to him a bit, and he said he bought it when he was 18. But I thought you liked the motorcycles, so I thought maybe you'd appreciate that.
Vincent Black Shadow is like seeing a unicorn. They're like unobtainium.
I saw it. It was just
Yeah.
unobtainium.
That's just like walking into your kitchen and seeing, I don't know, Arnold Schwarzenegger or somebody just making breakfast nonchalant, like, what? I'm here. Yeah, those are crazy. That's amazing.
My last question would be, I've noticed more like cabinets popping up.
Yeah.
Like, what do you got cooking there?
Well, I've got a little bit of help, and I am also coming into more and more raw components. And the big thing that's kept me away from cabinets, honestly, is price point, and it's partly and shipping. Most of the guys that I get cabinet inquiries for, like overseas or on the other side of the country, and it's like, well, I can make a cabinet for you for $400, but it's going to cost $250 to ship it. What's the point? Go buy something else local. It may not say my name on it, but you'll still get the sound. And that's almost always, unless the person is absolutely adamant, like, I have to have your stuff. That said, I've gotten some help making cabinets here. It's brought the cost down because one of the guys is like a shit-hot, amazing cabinetry carpenter guy who can build the stuff in like no time flat. I'm getting the wood for basically free, so then at that point, economically, it's feasible. I can compete with a $400 used Craigslist cabinet. I can offer a cab for $400. So. Guy in the back.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
If somebody here wanted to buy one of your amps, like Amp has in particular, what would the process be and how long is typical turnover?
It depends on parts. That's the short answer. The long answer is if we have the parts, probably about 2 weeks, sometimes less. We've turned around amps same day, if we're lucky. But that's when like the machine is moving at 100 miles an hour, and we're just kind of, it's like almost like a wood chipper. We're able to just like, okay, out, done. And especially if it's a very simple request. If it's something that's super duper involved in custom, it could take a couple months because there's R&D, troubleshooting, debugging, stuff like that. So you in the back.
Maybe I was using a lot of drugs back.
Button pusher guy's like, well, we got 10,000 of them. Let's stick EL34 on them and get them out the door. And you listen to them, you're like, what the fuck were you thinking? But you're stuck with them. So that's kind of the dirty tube secret. Anything else? Anyone? Okay, well, thank you very much.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
So, coming tonight, we return with Dave Sullivan. They're life by 1,000 paper cuts.
Once upon a time, there was a place on Southeast 82nd called R5D3.
Yeah.
Is he gone now? I haven't.
I haven't had a chance to look. To be honest, what I used to go to all the time was out on Division and 150th, 160th. He's gone. I haven't been out there in probably 4 years, but he was still in business 4 years ago. So, and he ran it out of his house.
In my life when I was restoring old cars, 50s vintage cars.
Yeah.
And the radios were always shot. The capacitors have gone down.
Yep.
And the tubes are gone.
Yep.
And I didn't like going to for 50 cents a tube or $1 a tube.
Yeah.
It was like going to the store.
Yeah.
And you just, I'd have a list,
Mm-hmm.
write the numbers down of the old tubes.
Yeah.